Welcome to the best hour of their day podcast with your hosts, Jason Fernandez
and me, Jason Ackerman. With more than 20 years in the business,
as both coaches and affiliate owners,
our passion is to help create world-class affiliates
and coaches by building
better boxes. Welcome to
the best hour of your day.
All right, we are back to talk about everybody's favorite subject, money.
That's right.
It should be. I don't know why it's not.
It's one of my favorites anyways.
Well, that's why they call you Money Nick.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's just right. It's like if the money gets figured out, everything else becomes easier.
I think the misconception there is that, sure, I think some people want a lot of money. Most people just want control of their money.
Totally.
I have this, I think we talked about it last time, but I wrote it down for the staff meeting, and I want to reiterate it here because it is in fact true. Most people's fears are rooted in lack of information.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, because we're going to be talking about, people who don't budget, should you outsource your budget, your bookkeeping, credit card debt, all of these things. If we kept digging and digging and digging, we would find a bout or a period of time, probably over a long time, where that person was just not paying attention.
Yeah.
You've seen it obviously I see quite a bit of it, but mine's very specific to gym owners. How many people have you worked with, Nick, in budgeting?
Oh gosh. I was thinking about this the other day. Yeah. I'm probably somewhere in the 1,500 range, somewhere in there.
That's so many people. Let me ask you this. What's the worst scenario you've ever dealt with?
I mean, in terms of okay, so I'm going to give you two categories. So there's the worst in terms of looking at the numbers themselves, meaning if I took out the people and the emotions and who is behind it, and I just showed you on paper, this is someone's scenario, here's their income, here's their debt, here's what's going on. What do you think? Then yeah, there's a few where it's it really comes down to ratios. Cause I've seen people with millions of dollars in debt, if you include all their debt, but but if they have businesses and stuff that can handle that, then that's a little bit different. Right. And so the worst case scenarios are going to be someone where they've got 50, 60. And I've seen some where it's 70% or more of their monthly income is going to just pay minimums and service debt.
Minimum.
That's the worst case. Yeah. So if you think about getting a mortgage and then a couple car loans, student loans, and then rack up a few credit cards, if you're not careful and if you don't make that much money, if you make kind of just normal, it's not, I think people would be surprised at how many Americans have greater than 50% of their income going to just servicing debt minimums. And
I guess you're right now that I'm thinking about it. If you went outside your means in a house, you'd have a $25,000 to $3,000 mortgage payment.
Yep.
If you bought a car that was probably outside of your means, you'd be paying easily $800 a month.
Yep. Yeah.
So now we're at 36, whatever that is, $3,700. And then you do
throw in some student loan payments.
I don't know I have no concept for student loans. What are student loan payments?
It depends on if it's just undergrad or if they went all the way through grad school or something. But I've seen people, a lot of average ones are probably just a few $100s a month to some that can be a couple thousand for lawyers, doctors, people like that.
We'll just assume those are high
but those are higher income though, right?
They can still do dumb things. But yeah. But let's just say with their own student debt, you're at 4,000, and then you rack up, I don't know, 50 grand in credit card debt. Yeah. At which point you're paying $1,000 in interest a month, probably, if not more. And now you're at, I guess you're right, $6 grand. That would be if you were making. That would be 60% if you were making $120,000 a year, which is pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's that's after tax, right? So, cause you got to do all that with your paycheck that hits your bank account. So, those scenarios end up being almost impossible to navigate without making humongous life changes.
That's what I was going to ask you. Have you ever had one where you're I can't help you?
Yeah, I've had people, and what it comes down to is I can help anybody who's willing, right? So it comes down to just are you willing to pay the price to do what has to be done? And so certainly I've had conversations with people where the bottom line answer is you need to either make massive changes or I can't help you because the shovel that you're digging with is just too small. And so you
can't put a dent in it. Mathematically, you can't catch up.
Mathematically, you can't catch up. And so now we either have to discuss selling a house, selling a car, both, moving to a low-cost area, filing bankruptcy. And for a lot of the times, a lot of conversations come down to like probably a combination of income and expenses. Like, hey, have you considered moving to a low-cost area and changing jobs?
Right.
It's like, it's a double whammy, you know? So it's like, if you're making, you know, average US income, I think household income is like 60 something. And if you're making that living in downtown LA with 2 kids,
I don't even know if that's possible.
It's not. And like, it's not on any sort of reasonable lifestyle level. And so I mean, I can count on, I've got 10 people I can think of off the top of my head that I've personally helped them through the course of, you know, many calls navigate moving from LA, San Francisco, Seattle, New Jersey over the last couple of years to Tennessee, Florida, Texas.
Just because cost of living.
Cost of living.
Yeah. That's the willing is the
willing's the key.
Part.
Yeah, it's the key.
It's like, what are you going to give up? And my wife was laughing at me last night. I was talking to her and I go through phases where I like ratchet things up. And I told her, I was like, I'm not listening to any more podcasts, and I'm not watching any, and I listen to 1 or 2 podcasts, and I watch a handful of shows, typically when I travel or on the weekends. I watch almost no TV ever on the weeks. But I do listen to podcasts at night. And I was doing the math because I was like lining up my goals and shit that I want to figure out and stuff I want. And I was like, I have a goal. I want these 3 skills that I need. And I was just like, where am I going to get that time? And I was like, oh, I have to give something up.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay. And here's the funny part. I didn't even think twice about it. Like, she was laughing at me. She was just like, what is wrong with you? And I was just like, she's like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. I was like, TV's dumb.
It's dumb.
I was like, it's dumb. I was like, and the news, right? I will listen to the news. Oh, this is interesting. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I might be neurotic, by the way. So but I want your thoughts on this because this is a money thing, right? So I was thinking, so like most of the podcasts I listen to have some sort of, I don't want to say political overtone, but like I listen to mostly centrist, but like I want to know what the fuck's going on.
Sure.
Right. Like, I'm not like listening to Glenn Beck or anything. That would be saying that I was at least somewhat right leaning, but that's the point. That's not the point. Jay, don't worry, guys. Jay is the white supremacist. So here, this is the conclusion I was coming to. I was thinking, and I actually like went into like some history books here for this, and I was just like, okay, so I'm listening to all this so that I can get prepared for some doomsday scenario. Like, I want to know how to react into the marketplace and blah, and like insert all of that. I want to be informed, right? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, with the exception of maybe the Great Depression over the last almost 100 years at this point, the biggest swing to the average American who was not dealing in high risk activities, meaning like you're a trader, you are over leveraging in order to flip real estate or something along those lines, where you are like a 2% swing in some market will ruin your life, right? Because that's what you do for a living. Barring that, the average person really on the high end is probably looking at a 15% swing in their buying power, right? So for instance, if you were to make right now inflation, depending on what calculations, call 14% over the past 3 years, right? But if you were making $80,000, call it 14%, that means your buying power would have decreased by 11 grand.
Okay.
Which I was like, okay, not great. I'm not suggesting we would want that, but I mean, the reality is like, okay, 14%. I'm like, okay, 14%. And if I looked at time allocation, for sure, you're probably wasting more than 14% of your time.
Easy.
I said, well, what would you be able to do with your free time to make up that loss in buying power that when the market swings back the other way would actually probably like 2 or 3x your earnings. But I was just wondering your thoughts, because I was like, I feel like that's accurate, because again, like we haven't seen a swing in inflation this hard in a long time.
Not in a long time.
And it's really egregious. But like the average person, yes, you feel it a little bit. Right. And I mean, the average person, I'm not, if you were low income, everything is worse all the time. Right. Like, I'm not trying to downplay that. Everything sucks all the time. But if you're making $60,000 to $100,000, $150,000, like it's minimal to no impact on you. It's grumpy. It makes you grumpy. You're like, I don't want to pay $120 in fucking gas. This is bullshit.
Exactly.
You know? Right.
You feel it the most at the grocery store.
Right.
Right. Like I've watched the average, like two people grocery bill over the last year and a half, 2 years, go from $600 to $700 a month to $800 to $1,000 a month, depending on how healthy and like organic and that kind of stuff you're eating. So like call it $300 per person per month to $500 per person per month.
Right. Which feels like a lot, because that's almost a 50% increase in your bill.
Feels like a lot. So you feel it there. And then the other place that the average person is going to feel it is if they're in the market for a house. Now, if you bought your house years ago, you don't care. You're not feeling it. But like if you're in the market for a house right now, you're feeling humongous pinch. But but continue with your thought.
But my point with all of that is, okay, so if that's all I have to make up, right? Okay, I can't do anything about the market.
Yep.
Right. The only thing I ever have control of is myself. A, I can budget better, and B, I can start to spend my time on other things
100%.
Instead of worrying about this. And again, 14% is the worst we've seen in 50 to 60 years.
Yeah.
Right. So assuming this is really bad.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to make up 14%. I have to make up 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, okay, well, could I spend my time on things that would help me make that up somehow? The answer is yes, you could. So I was just like, okay, I'm a high functioning person for the most part, right? Like I do a lot of things. I'm fairly productive, but that doesn't mean that I don't waste time. And I was like, okay, well, if that's what I want to do, if I want to do those things in that timeline, I can't do more with the same, right? I'm going to have to give up something. And I was like, okay, I've already been budgeting for a long time. I got all that dialed tight. I'm like, oh, I need to develop some skills. I need to learn new things and acquire, more knowledge. Okay. So I'm going to give up these things. And I was doing the math on it. You don't have to do it per week, right? You could just do it. Be like, the average show on Netflix is an hour long. And if it's a season of 10 episodes, that's 10 hours. And I don't know what the average person will watch, but like, let's say a minimum of 10 series per year that the average person will watch. That is 100 hours wasted. At which one I'm like, do you know what I could do with 100 hours? The math on it is basically like after about 20 hours, most people are dangerous at the thing, like whatever it is that they're doing. You spend 20 dedicated hours on it and you can smash whatever that task is.
I don't know how accurate this is because I'm just reading the first stat that I Googled, but it says, according to some study, the average typical American views around 3 hours of TV every day.
Oh my God.
So that's
like 1,000 hours,
900 hours a year. Yeah. 1,000 hours.
1,000 hours. Okay.
So I don't know where they get that stat, but let's say that, right. But but
I believe that if you go home and you just turn the TV on, that is accurate.
100%, especially if you're like, because some people are like, well, I'm like cooking dinner while I'm doing it. And I'm like, whatever. But so I have so many thoughts on what you said. I actually had to write them down because I'm like, I want to get them all in. So
I completely forgot that I was having that conversation with my wife. I went deep into a rabbit hole this weekend on all sorts of stuff.
No.
It was very productive, but it goes to everything that we're going to talk about in the show.
It goes to everything here. So a couple of things that I want to hit on. Let's start with this, which is like, I think it's important just to recognize that we as a culture are soft, right? As in, you're familiar with, are you familiar with the book, The Fourth Turning?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Okay. So this idea, right, of like bad times create strong men create good times create weak men, and sort of circles around, right? And so like I fully believe we're in a, coming off the tail end of a good time with a whole bunch of weak men, and that's kind of where we're at. And so with that in mind, part of it it's readjusting expectations around what it takes to do what I want, right? Which is like my great grandfather. I didn't even know him. He was dead a long time ago, but like just that age person, the concept of retirement didn't exist.
You just worked until you died.
The idea of working 40 hours a week didn't exist.
That's actually a good point.
Like, didn't exist. And so to a certain extent, you're like, okay, interesting. I'm not saying we need to all become workaholics and work until we die and work, 100 hours a week. But like, if the price of getting whatever it is I want is a season of working more than the current culture sets as bare minimum expectation, that might be a price I'm willing to pay. Like,
I mean, we were talking about this recently, where I don't know if it was on this podcast, but like the ultimate arbitrage right now is doing a good job and working just a little bit harder than everybody else. Totally. That's the ultimate arbitrage, like right now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird. I thought just that, I don't want to be like, oh, when I grew up, whatever. But like, so my dad is an immigrant, right? My dad is an immigrant from Cuba.
Okay.
So that's kind of all you need to know.
Yeah.
Right.
Like legit.
Yeah. Like he quite literally walked across the Rio Grande with his dad when he was 8 years old. And his dad goes, you go that way. I will go that way. Find the border patrol at 8 years old.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I always joke, and, my dad's just like, yeah, dude, who fucking cares?
Who cares?
Like, who cares? Just work harder, dude. Like there's people that have worse things going on.
Totally.
Like I always tell my dad he spoke no English, learned to speak English by watching TV. And then he played his freshman year in football with 2 left cleats.
That might be more, uphill both ways in the snow to school than any. I did it in 2 left shoes.
2 left cleats. 2 left cleats. Man. So anyway, that's a weird aside, but the soft. Yeah. And I thanked him when he was just here. I was just like, hey, thanks for like not making me like a complete wuss.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the second thing I wanted to say, you said a couple of things I loved. Control what you can control, which I think is great. And that's something that I'm always hammering on. But to answer your question more directly with the financial sort of percentage implications. So one thing that I think about a lot when it comes to budgeting, why I like budgeting, why I'm so focused on this stuff, is it's purely just an argument for efficiency. So like if you tracked every dollar and you rated every dollar that you spent with either a yes, that went towards my highest priorities, it went towards like a mediocre priority, or like, no, that was a waste. The average person probably only has maybe 30 to 50% of their money going towards the highest priorities. And I think that's probably generous.
Oh, I was going to be, that was the average person's not putting 15% away in retirement.
No, not at all. And so we're easily saying, even to be generous, let's say the average person is doing 30 to 50% towards the highest priorities and maybe 20 or 30%. They're probably wasting 20 to 30% easy. And that doesn't mean that they're wasting in like you should be saving 30% of your income. What that means is that's not going towards the things that are truly the most important to you. And you haven't sat down and really thought about them. And the reason I feel so strongly about that is because if you look at most research around habit-based decisions and decision-making in general, about half of every decision you make every single day is based on subconscious underlying patterns and routines and habits. And so these are big decisions like what you do and where you live and that kind of stuff, but they're really small decisions. And the example I give all the time is like, when you put that shirt on this morning, did you put your left arm through or your right arm first?
Right.
It's like, I don't know. I just did it. Well, it's a decision you made, and you made it out of subconscious habits and routines. And that's how people spend their money. They shop here, they spend there, they do this, they do that, they upgrade their phone on this timeline just because that's what everybody around them does. That's what their culture does. That's whatever. And so like, I feel confident saying like easily 25 to 50% of your spending is not going to your highest and most important priorities. And the whole point of budgeting is just to crank that percentage up on what's the highest and most important priorities.
And for clarity, I know this because I've worked with you and I've seen all the things that you do. When you say highest priorities, you're not alluding to anything other than what that person has decided is most important to them.
Totally.
With no
judgment.
With no judgment. It could be like, I want to travel. And be like, cool. That's where all your money goes.
Yes. I told you about the guy that I work with that told me he wanted to eat Chick-fil-A every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, he was like, yeah, as long as I'm saving for retirement and like kind of pay my bills, like I really just like eating Chick-fil-A and I would love to budget to go there every day. I was like,
perfect.
Great. Like, let's put that in there. Right. And so It's like, it's whatever your highest and most important priorities are. Most people just haven't sat down to think of them. Okay. Back to your time thing. What you're getting at is going, okay, well, what if I crank up not only my budget, which is where my money's going towards the highest priorities, what if I crank up where my time is going so that it's also going to the highest priorities? And if you're in a season of focusing on your finances and improving your finances, then all of a sudden you trying to get a little bit more efficient with your time so that you can increase the skills that you're going to then use to make more money, and it all works together to increase the efficiency across the board.
Right. So you increase your time, which means you tend to spend less money on wasteful things, at which point I can reinvest in them. Like I just recently invested in a coach for a couple different things, but I was like, but that's where I wanted that to go. It was there. I was ready. I'm like, and I didn't bat an eye about cutting the check. I was just like, yep. I hear, like, let's go. I want to get started yesterday. And she was like, this is great. And I was like, I'm going to be your ideal client. Have no fear, but that's the point. Right. And I would argue, and I do want to emphasize this, like my wife and I, it feels like we spend more money.
Yeah.
Since we started budgeting.
It should.
But we just spend it on the things we want to spend it on. We spend it on the vacation. We spend it on the nice dinners. We spend it on, like we just bought a rental home.
Yeah.
Like that's where I made the same amount of money the year before, was not capable of buying a rental home.
It's amazing.
So shit like that, paying closer attention with the budget with regard to tax planning, which then leads to follow-on actions, which is like, hey, what can we do to mitigate our taxes? Maybe we can just keep all of this money this time instead of just blindly cutting the check, right? But like all of it hinges on like budgeting, because if you can't figure out what you want to save unless you can figure out what you're losing first. Totally.
Yeah, you have to know the numbers to be able to even have that efficiency calculation going on. Okay, last thing, and I swear we'll actually start getting to the topic we said we're going to talk about. But
okay,
the last thing I wanted to say that you brought up that I think is a really good point is this idea of shower thoughts. So there's this guy that I used to work for who taught me a lot. Like I'm super grateful for my time with him. I was a contractor for him, and I was doing a lot of his marketing work. And there was a point in his company where he was growing rapidly, and he was wanting to transition the team from being mostly kind of contractors who were doing a bunch of different stuff, some of his work and then other things, to really being full focused and dedicated on that company. Right.
Okay.
And so I was one of the kind of key team players and kind of the main marketing guy. And at the same time, I was trying to build out my business and grow it. And we just had a conversation. He was like, what I'm trying to do is I want your shower thoughts, and that the time
Sounds
that
creepy,
you're walking,
but keep going.
Right. The time that you're walking the dog, the time that you're in the shower, the time that you're driving in between places, the time that you're whatever, I want your mind thinking about helping solve the problems here, not thinking about helping solve the problems for your other 10 clients that you're working with. And so he's like, my core leadership team, to like 3 to 4 folks at the top of the board, I need this to be your main work focus. And it was a really interesting little unlock for me because I was like, it's what ultimately helped us part ways. I can never say that.
Amicably.
Word.
Yep.
Thank you. Because I was like, cool, like I actually am not going to be a good fit for you long term. I want to go do my own thing.
Right.
But it was really interesting because it made me think, well, what am I thinking about? Like,
right.
And so back to your point with the podcasting, I think in our culture today, between podcasts and YouTube and social media and TV, it's easy to fill up all of the shower thought time or walking the dog time or drive time with more information, when instead we should probably be very careful about how much information we're intaking, only take what's necessary, and then be okay with quiet space so that our brains can be thinking about whatever the main thing is that we're trying to work on right now.
My wife yells at me about this once a week. She was like, she's like, I love you, but you're broken. She's like, you are incapable of quiet time. So I was like, but part of that was like giving up some of the podcasts and the stuff.
Yeah.
And then, cause I do like to write. I also like to physically write. I like to physically read and I like to physically write. And, I had probably like 10 pages of notes over the weekend, and I wouldn't say solved some big problems, but I mean, definitely started down the path of solving some big problems.
Yeah.
Which is like, oh, I'm just wasting time. I'm like, all right.
I love that.
So, wasting money.
Yeah.
Not budgeting.
All right. Number one, common pitfalls gym owners are making. Just simply not budgeting, not tracking. They don't even know the numbers.
I can tell you this. So we do something with every single person that comes in the course for Affiliate U called the money map exercise. And I can tell you with almost 100% certainty that 0 of them have gotten through that exercise with precise numbers, like meaning they submitted accurate numbers to us. And most of the time I know because they gave me round numbers. I'm like, that is statistically almost impossible.
Oh, it's really interesting. You guys spend exactly that much money.
Your rent is exactly $2,000. I'm like, weird.
No, you're so right though. I mean, on the personal side, if you stop any random stranger down the street or anybody listening, if you aren't tracking your money and I ask you what you spend right now on groceries per month, you have no clue. And you will be wildly off if you guess.
Dude, it's going back to that same example. Like they have no idea.
So no clue.
No clue. And this is the crux of, okay. So, so the gym owner who wants to, why is this important, right? Like, okay, why should you budget? The gym owner who wants to hire full-time staff, the gym owner who's feeling who feels like they're on the ledge and like, I need to do paid advertising, which I have no beef with paid advertising, by the way. I have beef with doing paid advertising with 0 information, which is what most people are doing. Meaning like you don't know what your gross profit is. You have no idea how to calculate a budget. You have no idea what your cost of acquisition or cost of client acquisition is. At which point this is like going into the casino and then handing a random stranger your money and say, pick a number on the roulette table and we'll just see what happens. I'm like, 100%. Is the worst decision of all time.
Yeah. Well, it's literally like the analogy I use all the time is like going on a road trip and just throwing your phone out the window and not having a GPS. Like, imagine that. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the CrossFit Games. I live in Tennessee. It's north of me. I'm just going to hit the road and start driving and hope I get there.
Just judge off the sun.
Just go. It's like, no, like you can't, the odds of me getting anywhere close are slim to none. And
even if you did get there by chance, it would take you so long.
Oh my gosh, it'd take forever.
It would be, you could, at that point, you could chalk it up to pure dumb luck
100%.
In that scenario.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of people are like, oh, I'm doing well financially. And I've had some gyms that are doing well financially, like really well. And I will be very candid with you. It is pure dumb luck because they have no idea why or how.
Yeah. There's a meme that floats around the like computer science developer coding space. And it's like this guy at his keyboard, like this, like racking his brain. And it says like, my code doesn't work and I have no idea why. And then there's another one in the next page where he's making the exact same face and it says, my code works and I have no idea why. And it's like, if you have no clue why it's working or why it's not, then it's going to be still like impossible.
You have to start budgeting. You have to start budgeting, no matter how painful it is, no matter how long the process. And I tell most people, I'm like, if you commit to it in 90 days, it'll be pretty tight.
Totally. It's not a lifelong like uphill battle. You've got
a year. I mean, I would tell you, I've been doing it for a year and I could set one up in no time and I could do some, I'm not Nick True by any means, but like, I could be dangerous right now. And I've been doing it for a year.
Totally. Well, and that's where like the thing that you had, and this is what, I have to sort of like sell people on in the initial is like you had you realized why it was important. And then you just committed to the process. It's like, if you just did those two things, you'll get there. And it gets really easy if you can just get over the hump.
Yeah. And sometimes, I know we've talked about this on past podcasts, but like they're, I don't know. I just need to hire somebody. I'm like, how are you going to determine how to do that? Yeah. You think budgeting would help? And they're like, oh, I'm like, right.
Yeah. There we go.
This solves your problem.
Yes. Yeah. So the second thing is like really natural into this because people go, okay, fine. I listen to you. I hear you. It's important. Fine. I'm going to start getting some budgeting and tracking going on. I'm just going to hire a bookkeeper. And then they're like, cool, I'm going to outsource that, get the bookkeeping going. And they'll kind of check that off the list of like, great, done that. And my opinion, and I actually just sent you last week, I sent you that article from the P&L. The P&L, yeah. And just talking about the importance of the owner really being in the weeds and knowing the numbers, especially for at least a season, so that you can truly understand what's going on. Because as the business owner, like you have two jobs. You have to be an expert on business and an expert on whatever your craft is. In this case, running a gym, coaching, helping people with their health and their fitness. And so like you have to do both of those. And being an expert on the business side means you have to understand the numbers. And so when I see all the time is I'll talk to somebody and they'll have, well, yeah, I've got a bookkeeper. They do this every month and they send me my numbers. But like they send me my numbers and it's like, 2 or 3 weeks after the fact. And then by that point, we're already well into the next month. And I don't really know what they say anyways. And I'm not really looking at them that well. And like, I'm not really able to look at the P&L and then like determine whether or not I can do something from that.
I'll tell you a story. I don't know how many accounts I've had in 15 years of opening business. Let's call it at least 6. And I've done some things pretty horrendously, meaning the P&L has not come back like with good numbers. Mm-hmm. If in fact I got one from the account, and not one. Some people are like, you have a shitty accountant, but I'm like, I deal with hundreds of box owners who have accountants, and this holds true far more often than not. Not one time will that accountant send you the P&L, A, probably on time, B, saying you're spending too much money. They're like, here's your P&L.
They don't care. Yeah.
No matter what it says, it'd be like, hey, you lost $4,000. They're like, here's your P&L with no context, no nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and then when I like met you and got on hip on all this, I was like, oh, that's not what they're for.
Yeah.
They're not here to manage their tax. They're there literally to make sure your taxes get filed. They are not there to make sure that you make money, regardless of what they tell you. That is not their job. Their job is to file the paperwork.
Yep. And they're not, I mean, this goes way off track, but like they're not incentivized to do so. Like the entire system is set up, the entire industry, their entire like role in the industry for most bookkeeping accountants, it's even if they're like, we're going to be different, we're going to help you. It's like the industry is set up in a way that it prioritizes and incentivizes focusing on tax preparation and then moving on to the next client. And so you have to have either someone who can help you take a more proactive approach, or you as the owner need to take responsibility and pick up the reins and take a proactive approach. And then eventually
which will probably involve somebody else helping you until you learn the skill, and then
100%.
you can do it yourself. But yes,
100%.
And that's what we tell people. It's the first thing I tell people when we put them through the budgeting course. And it's like, hey, this is not a replacement for bookkeeping. You need to keep your bookkeeper.
Yeah.
However, this is actually more important.
Yes.
You need to budget and you need to manage your cash flow.
Yep. So the next thing I want to hit on is like, again, this next little step. Great. So we're tracking now. We bought into that, and we're not going to outsource at least the budgeting part. We're going to do that ourselves. What am I looking for? And then, so the next common pitfall for people who may be even doing those two things, they don't know their numbers. They don't know their core numbers, and they don't even know which numbers those should be. And they don't know them off the top of their head. And so for me, the two core numbers that I care the most about in terms of the budget inside the box, it is, what is our average monthly revenue? And what are the total targets? Now, target is a YNAB specific word, but basically targets are your game plan. They are your goal. If you set, well, our rent is $4,000, $3,997 a month, and our utilities normally average $165 a month, and our equipment, we set aside $300 a month for that. If you add up all those numbers based on an average, what is your average target? What's your target? And the targets are your game plan. And the reason that I'm saying target here, not expenses, is that if I just say, well, what are your average expenses and what are your average revenues? Expenses vary so much. And so they'll say, well, last month my expenses were this, and next month it's that, because you've got an annual affiliate fee, you've got an annual insurance premium, you've got maybe property taxes if you own your gym or you own the building, you've got maybe an event once a year, you've got maybe a holiday party, you've got all these expenses that are not actually going to be an average monthly flat amount. But because of the way that we put the budget together, we create average monthly targets.
Right.
And so the idea is, like, at any given moment, if I run into somebody who's gone through our budget course and is implementing, I should be able to just say, hey, what's your average monthly revenue and what are your targets? And they should know those numbers, because those two numbers need to be about dead on, and they need to be looked at regularly.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember how many we set up, but I think is like you said, no more than like 17 categories. Like I could probably name 10 of them right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
The other 7 are probably like, they're definitely not fixed costs, but they're more from the, like, yeah, I adjust that like as needed, right? Like sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less.
Totally. But those numbers, again, to your point, most people just don't know them. And it's because they haven't been tracking and they've been outsourcing it. But those two numbers are the lifeblood of being able to help you start to make decisions, right? Because to your point, if I'm trying to figure out, can I hire a coach? If I'm trying to figure out, can we actually buy this new rowing machine? If I'm trying to figure out any decision, if I don't know what my average monthly revenue is, and I don't have my targets set up so that I can plan, then there's no way I can make that decision. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise I might look at the bank account and go, well, yeah, sure, there's enough money in there to buy the rowing machine, forgetting about the fact that money is already earmarked to do some other stuff.
Right. The other thing that I see in here that where a lot of people struggle is they incorrectly or don't actually go through the process of figuring out, like, where in my daily routine do I put this? Which is like that. Yeah. Might be the most important thing. Which, like, you could do all of this, but I've seen people who go through it and are like, I haven't done it in 2 weeks. And I'm like, why? And the reason for that is they did not plug it into a place where it would never not happen. So I plugged mine into a place where it would never not happen. So it's baked into my morning routine, and I never close that tab out ever.
Love it.
It's open 24/7.
Love it.
And that's how I never forget, because it's like, I do this, I do it in this order, right? So I wake up, coffee, read, open up the computer, boom, 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 done, moving on for the day.
It's really the same as working out, right? Like, it just has to become a non-negotiable. It has to become this thing that you're like, I'm the type of person who literally doesn't not do this. Like, Correct. Of course I'm going to do it. Like, it's not even a question. It's like, I tell people the goal is to get this thing to a place where eventually it's like brushing your teeth. Like, imagine that I was like, oh, Fernie, I haven't really brushed my teeth in like 2 weeks.
Well, hey, that's gross. Don't do that. I'll tell you, I played a little word game. So you can't just speak yourself to be good at things, right? 100%. There are word games you can play with yourself that do ultimately change behaviors. So for the longest time, I was like, I am bad with money, just bad, right? Like, and it was, I always struggled because I was like an above average earner, but always like didn't have the money that I needed to do the things I wanted to do. And I just wrote on my mirror one day. It's actually still up there. I don't know when I wrote it more than a year ago. It's still on my mirror. It says, I am good with money. Now, just because I wrote it on the mirror doesn't mean that I was good with money.
No. Right.
But what I did was I read it every single day. Every single day I read it. And it's probably okay for me to take it down, but I just don't because I don't. But what it did is like, well, what would somebody that was good with money do? Oh, you know what they would do? They would manage their fucking budget every day. Right?
Every day.
And I was like, and it was one of those things where the cost of entry to be able to say that statement was actually so low that it was laughable. It's like, oh, I need to spend a maximum of 5 minutes in here every day. Actually, not even every day, probably like 4 days a week because of the gaps on the weekend. And you're not going to get any imports anyway. It's just like, oh, okay. If I am not willing to do that, then none of this works and I'll never be good at it. So I was like, just commit to that.
I totally agree. I think the language we speak over ourselves is really important. Have I talked to you about the can't versus don't?
I don't think so, but I love this topic. Yeah.
Okay. So, let's go through on this sidebar really quick. So James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, has a whole, blog and book, about that. And, back before the book, I used to read his blog a long time ago. He has an article that stuck with me that he was talking about this study where what they did was they had 3 groups of people. They brought them in and they said, they gave them like a short workout routine and they tested them over 10 days. And they said to the first group, hey, when you like get up and are supposed to do your workout and you don't really feel like doing it, just try and do it anyways. They're kind of the placebo group. The second group, they said, when you get up and you want to do the work and you don't want to do the workout because you don't feel like it, tell yourself, no, I can't miss a workout. Speak that back to yourself. And then the third group, they said kind of the same thing, but then they said, tell yourself, I don't miss workouts. And they ended up doing the same test with like candy bars and a couple other different things. And so you have the first group, which is nothing. The second group can't, third group don't. And what they found was that the first group had like an average success rate of people who did the workout every single day. It was something like 50% did it. The can't group actually did the worst. And they had like a 20 or 30% success rate. And the don't group had like a 90% success rate over this 10-day period. And what they concluded from this study was this idea that when you say, I can't do something, it's giving your power away to something else. And it's implying that you would really like to, but something is holding you back. Something is telling you you're not allowed to. Something's keeping you from doing it. It's restricting you from doing it. Whereas when you say, I don't do something, like I don't miss workouts or I don't skip my budget, you are taking control, ownership, and you're stepping into an identity that says, I'm the type of person who doesn't miss a workout. I'm the type of person who doesn't miss my budget. And so like, imagine the example I love that they gave was like cheating on a spouse, because imagine how this sounds. Let's say I'm out with friends. Somebody comes up to me and they're hitting on me and I'm like, no, I can't do that. How does that sound versus me saying, no, I don't do that. I don't cheat on my wife.
When you put it in that context, it sounds really awful.
It sounds awful, right? Oh no, I can't cheat on my wife.
I can't. She'll be mad. Oh, yeah. That's the only reason you can't?
That's the only reason. Yeah. It implies that I would kind of like to, but she gonna be mad. And whereas I don't says something about me. I'm the type of guy that's not going to do that. And so anyways, I think language is super important. And when we say I'm not good with money, you are absolutely creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You now identify as that person.
Yes. Whereas if you go, I'm the type of guy that is good with money and handles money well, which means I don't skip my budget
ever. Like, it actually gives me anxiety to skip it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
and that's what I mean with like going back to the brushing your teeth thing is like, I literally start to feel gross.
Yeah.
If I haven't looked at my budget.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, I'm a lazy piece of garbage. Like, I guess I just don't care.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
Okay.
One more on the like budgeting and planning thing. I kind of hit on this a little bit earlier with the knowing your numbers, but it warrants its own point, which is one of the most common pitfalls is not planning for these one-time or yearly expenses that could be predicted. Right. And so they'll go, well, oh man, my affiliate fee came up. I forgot about that. It's like, you forgot about the annual affiliate fee that you pay every year, every single May or July or like it's the same time.
Until it pops up and you're like, oh, and then I'm bitching about my affiliate fee. You know, it's actually funny. It's really funny. I would venture to guess that most people's bitching and moaning about their affiliate fees is not actually rooted in their dissatisfaction with CrossFit. It is rooted in their unpreparedness to pay the affiliate fee.
I would totally believe that. I would totally believe that. Well, think about Christmas, right? Christmas comes every year, same time. Oh, these Christmas presents. It's like,
God, what if you spend so much money? You're like, maybe you should create a gifts line item in your budget.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, just actually sitting down and writing out what are the things that could go wrong. Let's have a category for it. Let's add to it every single month. And then when that stuff comes up, then you're happy to pay the affiliate fee. You're happy to pay the insurance premium. You're happy to fix the broken equipment because you've been saving for it.
I'll pay it so fast, they'll be like shocked. Like, oh, that was really fast. Yeah, it was there. I paid it.
There it is. I've been planning on it, man. I knew it was coming.
Here's my money.
All right. This next one, I want to lean on you a little bit, which is like, when it comes to pricing strategy, right? So common pitfalls is like just not having the right strategy around the way they're doing their pricing, the way they're setting things up. What are some of the most common issues you see around that?
Oh my God. Well, there's only one issue. Is that nobody put any thought into it, and they just looked basically around at what other people did and typically priced under that, thinking that was the solution. I know, because I'm guilty of that.
That makes common sense, right? So like dissect, why is that wrong? Because if I'm brand new and I don't know anything about business and I don't know anything about how this works, that seems like the logical way that I would go about pricing.
Well, the primary difference is this: you're looking at it through the wrong lens, right? When people make that decision, and this is what I think most affiliate owners understand. And if you understand it, then you're like, "Oh God, this is so dumb." When that action happens, I look around and I look at that gym and I look at that gym. That is not how business owners look at anything. That is how consumers look at things. Yeah. And when they make that decision, they are making that decision as a consumer, not as a business owner. Because a business owner would have, 1,000 questions with regard to like, what am I going to price it at? I'm like, I would start with like, what are we offering?
Yeah.
Right. And then I would look at what are our expenses? What are our anticipated sales? Like what are all of these? Like, how much capital do we have on hand? Like what all of these things. And I think that's what people don't understand, because I talked about this briefly in a previous podcast, is there's multiple identities that an affiliate owner would have. So you have your athlete identity, you have your coach identity, and you have your owner identity. And then that's when you're in the business, but there's actually one that happens before that, which is when you go from consumer identity to entrepreneur identity. And most people, even though they are entrepreneurs, still have not made the identity shift. People that struggle with price increase or struggle with money are still in the consumer identity, and they have not shifted over, because nobody who's shifted over into the entrepreneurial identity thinks that way. They're like, oh, there's a reason for this price. there's X's and O's behind it. This is the math behind all of it, at which point it is logical, going back to where we started, which was like, that fear is based in lack of information, because they have not made the identity shift from consumer to the entrepreneur. When you look at things through the other side of the lens, is like, what should it cost? And it has nothing to do, at least on a cursory level, with those other gyms. Yes, the market will bear what it will bear, but you kind of use that as a sanity check. You don't start there.
Yeah. Here's a question I actually have no clue on the answer to, and I don't know if you know this answer either. How many people that come through Affiliate U are they started a gym like from the ground up, or they bought a previously running CrossFit gym?
That is a good question. I think we have that information. I don't know off the top of my head, but this is anecdotal. The majority are due to some type of acquisition.
Okay.
And not, they're like the old heads. So most often I would largely group them in these two categories. Under 5 years, probably acquisition. Older than 5 years, probably started it from the ground up.
Okay.
Now there's some new ones in there where like in 5 years they started one. Who was it? I was thinking the other day where like Adam just quit his teaching job. And he's making like double what he was making as a teacher out of his garage. Yeah, it's awesome. So, but again, that's anecdotal. That's me like thinking off the top of my head. I don't know if that's accurate, but I believe it's probably to be pretty close.
The reason I ask is because I imagined like if you acquire a gym, then the temptation is to probably not make a lot of changes to pricing, because you just assume, well, this is what they've been doing. That would be my temptation. Or then
a little bit of both. Like it depends on it. I would argue it depends on the circumstances in which they purchased the gym.
Okay.
But even then, it has less to do with they want to leave it just because. But in a lot of instances, when there's an acquisition like that, an acquisition is a loose term. It's basically an assumption of debt in a lot of instances. Is that there is a fear of making changes because everything is so bad. They're like, "Oh, it's already bad. I can't raise prices right now."
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
no, it does. I just imagine there's so many things to think through, but pricing is so fundamental to like the way the money's coming in the door, that it feels like one of the things that you have to really spend some time and strategy around. And if you're not careful, it seems very easy to just go, either this is what they've been doing, or like you said, this is what the guy down the street does. So sure, we're close.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue there is a strong argument for it is the most important thing, which is like, what is the model, right? And then there's kind of subcategories underneath that I would argue. So like your models, is it PT? Is it PT and group? Is it just group? Is it like, what is it? Right. Like, and then how do I price that? And then there's obviously your sales process, but then there's the mechanisms for sales. And that's where, so like people can come up with your model, but then even the mechanisms for sales in a lot of instances don't make any sense. For instance, like, how did you come up with that discount? Like that's a mechanism to make a sale, which has no logic behind it. It was like, oh, that guy has a job, so you give him a discount. I'm like, that seems like the opposite reason you would give somebody a discount. But again, going back to like, if you don't know these numbers, you don't know how to manipulate them. And then you lose, you end up losing because you didn't think through it and say, hey, why would I do this? Like I just pitched to, we have our weekly staff meeting, and I like laid out a bunch of stuff. I was like, here's the changes they were making. I was like, and before you say anything, I want to walk you through the full thought of like the information that I gathered to get to this conclusion. And then I want you guys to punch holes in it.
Yeah.
And they got to the end and they're like, no, we're good.
Makes sense.
And I was like, yeah, that's what they said. They're like, it makes sense. And I was like, okay, that's what I was hoping you would say. And that was the process that I went through, which, by the way, for anybody listening, was like 6 months of tracking and looking at all sorts of shit to come up with like, I think I can manipulate this if I get enough information. Because if I want to move that number, I can use 4 mechanisms to move it. And if I want to move that number, I can at least come up with 4 mechanisms to move them up or down. And I told him, I was like, I don't know to what degree this is going to work, but I know for a fact it's not going to hurt.
I love that.
You know, but it goes back to like knowing the numbers.
You have to know the numbers.
And look, you have to know the numbers.
You have to know.
And I would argue, if you are a gym owner who's overwhelmed with numbers, start with one. Start with one number, right? Just like you start with going to gym 1 day a week. Start with one number. Track the one. I would even argue track the one that is easiest for you to track.
Yeah.
Put it on a sheet. And you're like, what else would I track? A month later, add another metric to what's the next thing you want to track? Put that one on there. And then slowly you will build the habit and you will be somebody who tracks numbers.
There you go.
You know, so it's a process like everything else. And I think we kind of talked about this last time. If you let people in on the fact that it is a process and not just like a magic pill, they're more likely to succeed because they will be prepared for it being a process.
Yeah. I love that. I don't have anything else to add on the pricing.
You did this too. Just going back to the process thing, you do this really well. We were like, hey, that's going to take you, like when you come in, you teach people money, like 90 days. And I was like, oh, yeah. Okay. So if I'm all fucked up in the first 30 days, I don't care because Nick said it was going to be in 90. So I have 60 more days for this to not be a mess. And then I was good. And then it was fine. And I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah. Well, it just takes time, man. It's like anything. And that's a lot of this has to do with just setting proper expectations for yourself around how quickly and, how not quickly you're going to be able to get there.
Right.
The next one. So if we think about when we're, the whole conversation right is around, money and pitfalls and stuff, the two big things are revenue and expenses. The thing that drives the revenue the most is going to be your model and your pricing. We talked a little bit about that. Your biggest expense outside of the building rent is your payroll, is your team. And so one of the biggest mistakes, or at least one that we see, is not being, again, strategic about who you're hiring, how you're doing it, staffing up too early, and getting into a scenario where, between the making payroll and just paying the rent, you're just pulling your hair out. And so how do we avoid or be thoughtful about not staffing up quicker than we should?
I think there's 2 mechanisms to that. So I think the first one is, you need to know your numbers. Like if you have a budget, this becomes significantly easier. Yeah. So if we were going to go like the short answer, which is like you just create a different line item that says next employee, what would I like to pay that person? And I stick that much money into that bucket every single month just to see what happens. Yeah. Maybe it breaks the budget. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it breaks the budget half the time, at which point you're like, okay, well, now I have like a general idea of like how feasible this is. And then I can either adjust the timeline with which I'm going to hire this person, or maybe adjust the amount that I was going to pay this person. But both of those would be based on information. I'd be like, how'd you come up with that? And you would be like, here's how I came up with it. At which point I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. Yep. The first step I'll typically ask people is when I getting into like working them through a payroll reallocation, which is like, I'm paying 10 people. And my first question is, well, how much are you paying those 10 people? Yeah. And they're paying them $4,000. I'm like, could you pay 2 people that $4,000 in any breakdown that you wanted? Because that money is there. The problem is it's dispersed across 10 people, which we know creates inconsistency with regard to delivery and fulfillment. It's just like, well, if I can give it to primarily 3 rather than 10, I know with good confidence that I will be able to create better consistency, which will create longer retention, which will allow me to focus on the right things, which will drive sales.
Love it. Love it. So again, I mean, the answer goes back to like, you got to know your numbers, you got to be in the weeds on this stuff. And then if you find yourself in that situation, once you know the numbers kind of speak for themselves, is to be like, how you're going to fix the problem. And so you can,
I was going to say, I'll give you a couple other examples. This happened at the mastermind or even before the mastermind, but I can think of at least 2 examples at the mastermind. If you are a gym owner who is half in, half out, meaning like you are running the gym part-time and you don't have a budget, I can say with a high degree of confidence that if you put a budget in both places, on the low end, you would speed up the process of leaving your job by 500%.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
500%. You thought it would take 4 years. I'm like, I bet you could do it in 1.
Yeah.
I bet you might be able to do it in less than 1.
Yeah.
But you won't be able to make that decision, and you definitely won't be able to make it stress-free or without a massive amount of fuck-ups without knowing the numbers.
Yeah.
And we've done it time and time again. They're like, I want to do this. I'm like, tell me the numbers and I'll tell you the answer, because math is pretty finite.
Yeah.
Like it's 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
Like, and if it doesn't, then we have a problem, at which point we can dive in and we can figure out what that looks like. But it all goes back to like, you need to know the numbers.
Yeah.
Hey, can I buy an Echo bike? I'm like, what's the numbers say? Can I hire another employee? What do the numbers say? We want to expand our space. What do the numbers say? Like, I want to pay for paid ads. What do the numbers say? Do you have that ad spend? Do you have that money that you could light on fire and still operate? If that's the case, you can do it. It still doesn't mean it's a good idea yet, right? But it's there.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead because what you just said is perfect to this point that I was going to make, which is like one of the most common pitfalls is not setting goals based on what sounds good, not based on real numbers. Right. And so like in your example of, the gym owner who's working a job full-time or part-time, and they're trying to get the gym to be their main thing. You have to know what your personal life needs are, so that then you can set goals on the gym side of what you need to pay yourself. And then from there, you can back out and go, okay, well, what does the gym need to make in order to pay myself that? And right. And so that's where it's like, if I'm working with somebody and I'm working with them on the gym side and the personal side, then I want to know what are the average monthly revenue for the gym, the total targets for the gym. We talked about those earlier. I need to know what are the total targets for your personal life. If you have a spouse or somebody else who's working, then we just need to know, okay, well, after we know the total targets for your personal life, what does the gym need to pay you ideally? And then from there, we can do some math and go, all right, well, if the gym needs to pay you that much, what does the gym need to be making in revenue to make that happen? And that's the beauty of like when you're really cruising on this system, is because now all of a sudden, when I'm setting goals for the gym and going like, I want to get to this many members and this much monthly revenue and like, it's not based on what sounds good. It's not based on what sounds fun or what's cool on paper. It's literally based on real life outcomes that we care about, based on, because I know if I hit this many members at this much revenue, I can quit my job and like do the thing that I've been dreaming about for a long time.
Yeah. It all goes back to the numbers. And this is like some people, other people in the industry are like, oh, net 3. And I'm like, no, dude, the math, it's math. You can't argue my math. Net 3 over 12 months, 36. I didn't go to math school, but that's pretty accurate. Anywhere between, if your price points are $150 to $180, you're talking about something to the tune, depending on where it is in that range, of $55,000 to $76,000 in increased revenue annually. Right now, if I was to tell you, hey, I want to increase my revenue by $70,000, $76,000, and I'm like, that's not useful to me. But if I'm like, you need to get and keep 3 people every month, and if you do that enough times, the math works out for you.
Love it.
Right? You just have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And then you'll have setbacks, and you have to figure out why, because then things change, and you're going to be tracking other numbers, which is like, why do we have higher net cancellations? What are the holds going on? Do we need to change the policy? Like all sorts of crazy shit you start asking yourself. And you're like, oh, if I can drive this number down by 15%, I can drive that number up by 15%. It's 30%. I don't have to drive 30% out of one bucket.
Yeah.
I could drive 10% out of 4 and get 40% increase.
Yeah.
But you can't do that without knowing the numbers, right? No. And again, it's a process, right? You learn one and you're like, I'm pretty good at this one. I'm just like fitness, right? Like I'm pretty good at weightlifting. Cool. Go do a little gymnastics. Oh, I'm pretty good at gymnastics. You're like, I suck at cardio. Let's get a little bit better at cardio. And you go back and you start polishing all three. It's the same process. The same process. I'm pretty good at coaching. Great. You suck at sales. Fix that. Be like, I'm not really good at systems and budgeting. I'm great. Get good at that. It will help you be better at the other two. I promise you. And that's the whole process. It's a never-ending loop. The refinements get a little bit more nuanced, or the problems get bigger. At which point you need to develop another set of skills, and you need to go. You find out like, I don't really know the numbers as well as I thought I knew the numbers, because this is a whole different game now. Yeah. You're like, oh, got it. Okay, cool. Time to go back to school.
In your mind, like, so I've kind of shared from a budgeting perspective what I think some of the most important numbers are. In your mind, if I'm listening to this and I'm going, okay, cool, Fern, I hear you, but like, what number should I start focusing on? What are the top 3 to 5 numbers that you're like, you need to know this.
Are we talking budget or just in the gym?
Let's go with in the gym, because in the budget, okay. I've already said kind of mine,
right,
the ones that I would focus on.
Yeah, I mean, there would be a series, but all of the number of people that have no idea anything about their lead flow is the vast majority, meaning most of them have no idea how many they get per month. So let's just say I'm going to make up this sequence, but any gym owner's sequence could change just slightly, but let's just say a lead, okay, right? That's the first metric. How many do I get? The second one would be like, of that number of people, how many actually responded? Okay. Right. So I had 30 leads, 15 of them responded. Okay. So it's 50%. And then 15% of those responded. 7 of them, I got to show up for a consult. Okay. Right. So my contact was 50%. My show rate was, call it 47.5%. And then most people are like, oh, I'm a good closer. I'm like, everybody's a good closer in CrossFit. It's not hard, right? They showed up for a consult and then they purchased. At which point you're like, if I know those numbers, I'm like, okay, well then where's the obvious gap when you start lining these out? Right? Well, the obvious gap is not at your sales. Now the amount or the dollar we could look at that'd be a different number, but just the blanket numbers, leads, show rate, booked, converted, right? If you knew those, you would have to back yourself into like, why are we getting low response rate? Is it time, right? Are we not responding fast enough? Are we responding via the wrong medium? Like, am I emailing when I should be texting, and then texting works half time? Should I be calling them immediately? So then what'll happen is you'll get higher responses, and then you'll create another problem, which will be like, they're not showing up. So I'm like, cool. Now we've identified another problem. It was like, maybe the way you go about offering them to come in needs to be fixed. Right. But again, you'll always find the gap. You'll be like, the gap is right there. Right. Yeah. It's like a sore thumb. Like, you can't not look at it. Right. So I would track those. And then the other one's just like track holds and cancellations, track them together. Because guess what? They're both loss in revenue. Yeah. So think of them as one and the same. One you're likely going to get back, still not guaranteed. But I would track those 4 metrics on the other end, and I would track the other 2 on the back end. And you'll start to figure out like, this is what I need to beat X, Y, and Z. And then it becomes a game. Yeah.
Well, and then the way you play with the budget, right, is you're like, okay, cool. Well, I've already been messing with the budget. And so I know I really want to hire another coach, which means I've been messing around with putting, $500 a month or $1,000 a month or whatever it is into a category, trying to see what that feels like, which means the new revenue that I now need to be hitting is $12K a month or whatever it is. Okay, well, if I need to hit the $12K a month, let's pop over to my, sort of lead pipeline numbers that I've been tracking.
Right.
And what can I manipulate over here to increase to then get to my consistent 12K a month?
Well, the other thing that you'll find out here is, because again, we'll talk about like leads is, if I look at all of the affiliate summits that we go to, like what's your biggest pain point? Leads. In a lot of instances, it's not leads is the complete statement, right? It should say, I don't know what's going on with my leads. Like, that would be the actual statement, right? Yeah. So it's not like, they might have a leads problem, but like, contextually, what are we talking about? Like no leads, or you just don't know where those are at?
Yeah.
Okay. So then what you can figure out is, because this is where you get into a slippery slope where like, I need more leads, at which point you start gambling. And there's nothing worse than an ignorant gambler who doesn't know how to play the game, because you're making decisions based on lack of information. You don't know what you could spend and lose, because you will lose in advertising. Like there's that it's cost of the game. And at which point you're like, I don't know how much I could lose. I also don't know how many more do I really need to get? Right? That's a fundamental question that everybody skips. How many more do you need? Do you need 5? Right? And most people, it's for sure single digits.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I could get you consistently in the mid single digits every single month, like you would be fine.
Yeah.
Right. So then it's like, okay, well, that's probably not an ad spend. That's probably fixing a couple of the knobs within both of those pipelines. And then you can play around with some other stuff. Yeah. And that would lead you to really, I don't need to spend money in order to fix this problem. I need to track better to solve this problem. And then what I'll highlight is like, I don't have a skill set, or I'm bad at this. At which point you'd be like, I can get good at this. And you work yourself through the whole cycle all over again.
Yeah. So. It's almost like how can we get, like, I could almost summarize this whole episode with, how do we get a gym owner to be as excited about the numbers of the business as they were when they first got into working out and eating well, and being like, oh, this is a game. Like I can play with my lifts this way. I can play with my programming that way. Like the way that almost like a childlike excitement towards it.
I will tell you, and I'm gonna tell you, and then we're just gonna end the show. If you know your numbers, you will win.
Thanks for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. We appreciate you listening and choosing to have us help you in your passion for coaching and affiliate ownership. You can find more episodes just like this on all podcast platforms. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us on any social media platforms, or you can visit www.besthouroftheirday.com to book a call. If you found this episode helpful for you, please share it so that we can help other coaches and affiliate owners to help build a bigger and stronger CrossFit community. Thanks for listening.